Welcome, everybody. I'm not sure if I am viewing this correctly. Let's see. I'm learning here. Okay, it looks like I'm live. Am I live? Somebody in the comments tell me if you can see this. I see that there are a couple of you lurkers. I appreciate you being here. So somebody in the comments jump in there and, scream that you're first. Oh, it says that I have to sign into chat. What do I need to do? Okay. Yeah. Is that working now? Hey, somebody says I am live. Thank you, Elizabeth Nicholson. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but I appreciate you being here. I have a lot to share with all of you today. Yes, good. Folks are here. Excellent. So I have a lot to share with you today. I was going to go live. I've been kind of, this is only my second live, and I was going to be playing with this a little bit, just going live about things unrelated to Bricks and Minifigs, tangentially related, and then, like a gift from the universe, Bricks and Minifigs put out a PR statement. And it is such a perfect illustration of what I want to talk about. Oh, the volume is too low. Thank you. Let's see. Better now? Let's see if I get the mic right there. What do you think? Is that a little better? I can maybe turn that up. I'm not sure if it's picking up some of my desktop audio as well. Let's make sure. Testing. Ooh, the desktop audio. Is it coming from the right place? Testing. Still hearing that it's too low, and I'm not able to see it quite correctly. Learning. Let's test my widgets here. Let's see if that is a little better. Okay. Let's see if this were to sound right. If I were to get, say, a super chat, I would be able to hear it. That's what it would look like there. So, testing that out. So, and if you please, if you've got a super chat kind of question, I can veer off topic. But I did want to tell you all, welcome from the East Coast. Glad you are here. So I did want to tell you all about kind of the context of the context. It's a bit meta how we got here. So this last week's chapter of the novel that I'm writing, the back portion of it, maybe the last quarter, the narrative voice goes off about how one of the protagonists, who's a writer named Benjamin, right? So already we got a little, fourth Wall-E kind of Deadpool thing going on, but talks about how this character is feeling frustrated with a very small minority of folks in the comments who are saying, hey, please don't talk about anything other than BAM. Don't try and put this in any kind of larger context. That bothers me. And what I've come to understand is when they say that, what they really mean is there is a specific kind of context that I don't want to hear about, right? Some of those folks would be totally fine if I were criticizing Mormonism, which I'm not gonna do because I don't actually believe that the whole kind of, oh, it's the Mormon mafia angle is truly to blame. I think it's a little deeper than that. I think that this is not a conscious function of a bunch of, people sitting around in, a dark room in the temple in Salt Lake City, smoking cigars and saying, oh, how can we, steal these Lego? I think it is folks who are innocently and perhaps unconsciously saying to themselves, well, we've been taught all our lives that the people who are, white, male, wealthy business owners, we just defer to them. And they were trained that way in their places of worship, regardless of whether that was, Mormonism or had been any other kind of religious institution that is, that tends to focus on white, male, wealthy people, right? And so when the police were confronted by Ammon McNeff, they just went, oh, we got to side with this guy because the other guy's an out-of-town YouTuber, right? The enemy, right? And I don't know that it was even conscious that they would go, wait a second, this out-of-town YouTuber has all the evidence, and maybe this guy we've been taught to defer to is the one who's lying to us. They just went, oh, okay, we trust him. And I think even in Salem, there was this initial deference to, oh, the local business leader, which puts a lie to the whole, this has anything to do with Mormonism. I don't think those police officers in Kaiser were part of any kind of Mormon mafia. They were just, going, hey, these are the people that we defer to because they're the local business owners, right? And in retrospect, I'm sure they're looking at this larger thing, again, in context. You're going to hear me use the word context a million times. And they're looking at this and they're going, boy, we really looked dumb because we didn't take into account the person who was showing us the evidence. We just listened to Brandon Best and Josh Johnson, who were telling us to believe them. And now that we're seeing their reports and they're like demonstrable lies in the police reports, like conflicts within that. I'm sure the police are looking at that and going, ooh, that's a bad look for us that we trusted people who were so clearly lying to us. So I was going to talk about some things I came across that were completely unrelated to BAM today. And then BAM gave us this gift of the concept of context. And so I want to talk about these other things, but I think I want to, let's start with the BAM thing, because I know that's why many of you are here. And I think it's a really good illustration of why context matters. So this is a PR statement, and thanks to the Echo Base Network and those of you who are interested in this story, Echo Base Network has become like a great resource for real journalism. And when I say real journalism, I mean they're doing things in a journalistically ethical way. They are finding sources, and they are they're keeping those sources' identities secret when they need to, but they're sourcing their stories appropriately. And so it's been really cool to see the way that their show has kind of evolved as it has been following this story, and they broke this one for me. So thanks to Coach at Echo Base Network who shared this, and then I was like, I gotta share this with everybody because wow, it is something. So this, tell me if you can see this, was posted by Bricks and Minifigs North America, their Facebook account today. And it's something. Let me make sure I can read it along with all of you, as you can see that, because I can't see that. It's too small on my own screen. But that is, hey, I got a notification which says that I should acknowledge what that notification was. What was that notification? Somebody's asking, I saw something about Ammon was sued for elder abuse. Is that true? Yes, in a way. So one of the complaints made by the folks at the Canby store when that was taken was that the way that what they would call a hostile takeover was done rose to the level of elder abuse. And it's worth reading that case. I'm not an attorney, so I can't speak to whether or not that counts as like a separate part of something they were sued for, and I don't want to misspeak about that, but that was one of the things that within the complaint they alleged was that this was abusive, specifically towards this elderly lady and the way that it went down. So yes, that's a real thing. And again, depending on your definition of a pattern of behavior, doing that more than once to folks who are older, does that constitute a pattern? I leave that to you to decide. But I wanted to share with you this piece here, which I hope you are all able to see, and which I am currently having trouble seeing. Okay, here we go. So this came from the Bricks and Minifigs North America post, And this is on their Bricks and Minifigs North America Facebook page. My understanding is that they have this perhaps new page as they have opened stores in Canada. They're trying to kind of reposition themselves as Bricks and Minifigs North America. Question for somebody who's been following, and I'll bet the BAM map is on this. Were there new LLCs made in the process? Because dodging accountability through continually making new LLCs, again, pattern of behavior, right? So is Bricks and Minifigs North America some new way of trying to say, can't sue us, we're no longer Bricks and Minifigs US, we're Bricks and Minifigs North America, right? I don't know, speculating, but I wonder. Anyway, the Bricks and Minifigs North America put this out today. And it says, at the end of the day, Bricks and Minifigs has never just been about Lego bricks. Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. My suspicion is that Bricks and Minifigs really, according to some of the folks at the top, was never really about Lego. I think it was about flipping franchises, or at least selling franchises, and I think their business model and the folks who've run the numbers, backs that up, that selling franchises was more important to them than selling Lego individually to customers. But that may be an accidental truth. That's not the larger context example that I want to bring to you. So it says, it's about you. The collectors who finally find the missing figure. Wow. Is that not one of the most remarkably tone-deaf things you have ever seen? That missing minifigure. Yeah, if you're embroiled in a scandal about more than $100,000, I know that quantity is in flux and has been debated, but more than $100,000 of missing Lego, do you want to say, hey, Bricks and Minifigs is all about collectors who finally find missing Lego? Then it goes on, the parents making memories one brick at a time. Remember, we saw in their kind of operational guideline pitch stuff where they were talking about getting around parents and going at kids and trying to manipulate them and instructing their salespeople to do so in that way. When that's just come out, do you really want to be talking about parents making memories and, fourth bullet here, the kids who walk through our doors with eyes full of wonder, who you then target and try and manipulate into, essentially upselling their parents? And the builders who turn imagination into something incredible. Again, do you want to be talking about changing one thing into another when you've taken something that was wonderful, these people's Lego, and turning it into something, the word incredible means unbelievable, right? This non-credible, series of lies that you have told. And then they go on. Every trade, every conversation, every build, every laugh, you bring the magic that fills our stores. Thank you for making Bricks and Minifigs more than a store. Yeah, it's more than a store right now. You've built a community where creativity, nostalgia, and connection come together, and we're grateful to be a small part of your story. Here's to many more builds, discoveries, and memories together. Thank you for being the heart of what we do. Hashtag, among others, hashtag thank you. Yeah. So, here's why I think this is a wonderful illustration of exactly what I wanted to talk about today. That whole press release, out of context, is fine. It's pablum. It's pretty empty, right? It's not particularly meaningful outside of context. And so when folks were hopping in on the comments on some of my previous videos, and they were saying, "Oh, I'm so angry that you are talking about the wider context in which this Bricks and Minifig scandal is taking place," I think this is a really good illustration of why context matters. A pablum PR statement about how nice it is that kids are filled with wonder when they are, interested in Lego, and about finding that missing piece. Sure, that's totally fine. That's wonderful. out of context, right? None of us would pay any attention to it. We would go, oh, it doesn't even read like, oh, this is a clearly a corporation that is in crisis. And the police reports from Salem Kaiser that clearly show that they were hiding evidence of criminal behavior just dropped, right? You'd read that and you'd have no idea. They're not referencing that. They're not acknowledging that in any way. And then once you have the context, it reads very differently. And that's why I think it's so important to put things in context and to put things in a larger context and to recognize the ways that they interact with the things going on in the larger world. And so when folks say, oh, I don't want you to make this BAM story political, if you take away what is larger than this story, you deprive it of meaning, right? Okay, this is it becomes this is a totally, I don't even know where you would limit it to. Is this a totally isolated case where Reckless Ben discovered one thing that happened at one place and that's where you're stopping? Of course not, right? Because it's a story about police corruption. And then it's a story about a pattern of behavior. And then for a lot of folks, oh, okay, there's this religious angle, which again, I don't think it's a religious angle. I would go even broader than that. What does the kind of model of institutional religion, regardless of what that religion is, do to people's sense of why they just need to obey authority, right? And the bigger the context gets, the more you understand this story and why people are interested in it and what it is telling us. Now, some people don't want it to get that big. They want this to be a diversion from things that are so upsetting and feel like they're totally outside of their power. Totally get that. They want it to just be a break. And so it's frustrating to them when I say this isn't a break. This is actually connected to some of those things you are frustrated about, right? But it is, right? Like this story does speak to larger things, whether people like it or not. And some folks appreciate that, recognize that, And I think some folks are saying the reason I am following this story is I would like to see a corporation held accountable because we see corporations that are not held accountable so often. We see wealthy, powerful people not being held accountable. And they're looking at this and they're going, maybe in this case, we're going to actually see somebody, held to account. If our case is successful and goes forward, thanks to those of you who've supported the GoFundMe, somebody in the comments, drop that GoFundMe link in there. I would really appreciate it. That has made all the difference. We are then going to be able to push them beyond the point where they're going, you can't afford to actually ever hold us accountable. Okay, but thanks to all of the supporters, we're going to be able to push to the point where we can at least hopefully get discovery. And, discovery is where a lot of secrets are going to be revealed. So those folks who are engaging in that way are not just, casual observers of this story. Their literal monetary investment is going to change the outcome of the story, right? Because folks have said, we want to put this into your legal defense fund, we're able to hire an attorney, and that attorney is able to hire the experts who are, necessary to put all this together and turn it into something that could be really significant. Thank you, MLS Making Law Simple, and that just popped up on screen correctly. Woo! Yes, so the folks from Making Law Simple are getting to help me, learn how the actual mechanics of this live works through this demonstration. So I really appreciate that. Author Duncan Wilson, who is one of the sponsors of this show, I'll talk more about Duncan Wilson's work at the end here, points out correctly, nothing happens in a vacuum. This is a case of, business environment and culture that has gone all the way back, to the 80s and beyond, right? We could, where you draw the line in that context actually gets really difficult, right? Is it the 80s? Is this 1950s corporatism? Is this bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's worth exploring. Eric Rollins says, I just want to see the police and Olive Bam do the chicken dance. Yes. And also, aren't there a whole lot of other people we would like to see forced to do the chicken dance? Right? That's what I wanted to get at. So again, going back to the writing. So I've written this passage in the book. We'll see if it ever gets into the final version. It might be too self-indulgent. This novel is so meta, including a character who is Benjamin, a writer, right? That the question of what is too self-indulgent and is really there for the benefit of the writer and not the reader and needs to be excised from the final product is going to be a really tough one in the edit, because how much do people want to learn about what's going on with Benjamin, the writer character in this story? Who knows? That's one I'll have editors providing some, outside input on. And those of you who've been following along with the story, that's what I want to hear. Like, cut this. This doesn't do us any good. This is for you and not for us. Or I love this and this had a good gag and it made me laugh. Keep it, right? So that's something that I will have to be exploring as I write it. But I found myself looking at those last few paragraphs and going, is this just me venting? Or is that okay because this is a novel about what this character is going through? But I wanted to kind of address this question of, yes, somebody making law simple. I was surprised to hear that the Oregon police were pushing for criminal charges. Again, fingers crossed, right? That would be, again, so helpful, because they have the power to bring things to light that you and I, as average citizens, cannot simply demand. Ben did an amazing job of just kind of walking in and saying, tell me the truth, and getting them on camera lying and lying and lying, right? And that's great. That's, citizen journalism. That is the one tool. But ultimately, they could then send an email to him a month later saying, we're never going to turn over the inventory. Please stop emailing us. Well, they can't send that email to the Kaiser district attorney, and say, sorry, we're just never going to turn it over. Leave us alone. And so kind of coming at them from these different angles, our civil case, potentially a criminal case, all the various citizen journalists who are doing remarkable work in Freedom of Information Act requests and getting documentation that way. That's been really wonderful. And I think people need to, yes, somebody says they underestimated Ben. Vicky says they underestimated Ben. Absolutely. And I've often said that's the key to his style and his success, right? And I fully admit, the first time I had a conversation with Ben, I was like, seriously, this guy's going to take down this corporation? And then I heard his interview with Josh Johnson and I was like, oh, he's brilliant. This is how it works. It's a rope-a-dope. It's Muhammad Ali, right? He comes at you and goes, what? You can just hit me. You can scream at me. You can yell whatever. And I'm just going to go, dang, and take it, right? And then as he is taking all of these blows, they say things they never should have said. Like, we don't have the collection. I do have the collection and you can't take it. Come on in. You could take it right now, right? They were saying, Josh Johnson's saying those things because he's not taking Ben seriously. And boy, Ben did such a great job of just weathering that. I admit, I do not have the patience. Like, the first time they lied, I would have been like, wait a second. You said the following, and now you're saying the opposite, and then they would have clammed up, right? But Ben did such a good job of just letting them lie to him. Right? Lie again and again and again. And that's so valuable. People who have those kinds of skills and recognize that they have those skills and can employ them. And, somebody like me can say, I don't have those skills. I can't listen to somebody just lie to my face over and over without saying, hey, you're lying, right? Like, some of us just don't have it in us, but Ben is very patient. My patience is this great gift in a classroom when I'm dealing with students, right? My, colleagues will, recognize, like, patience is something I have there, but I have no patience for certain kinds of things. And if an adult was just lying and screaming at me in my face, I would absolutely be like, BS, like, no way, I'm calling you out, right? And Ben is able to just take that. So credit to him. He did such a great job, and has throughout. And he recognizes this is, he and I have very different kind of goals in all of this. Chris and I want justice for ourselves, right? We are, and that creates kind of a tragedy of the commons. And one of the things we're very actively trying to avoid and we're very conscious of is we don't want to get ourselves into a situation where we're saying, oh, well, we'll just sign some NDA that lets them go on and do this to 1,000 other people, right? But we know that is going to be a temptation at some point, and we know our attorney is going to go, hey, this, might be how this whole thing gets resolved for you. And so how we can, try and bring justice in some way that holds Bam accountable. Well, Reckless Ben has a very different motivation. He's like, draw it out, right? Draw this out and he said so in interviews, draw this out for years. It's great for me. And so that puts Bam in this situation, which I love. I have no sympathy for them in this regard. If they're going to tell a bunch of people, hey, we're going to draw this thing out and make it incredibly expensive and you'll never be able to fight. And now they're dealing with an opponent who's saying, if your only tool is drawing things out, good, I like that. Like, how do they beat him? And so that if that's the only tool in their toolbox other than, hey, let's get a shotgun, right? I mean, I feel like that's kind of where they got to, was like the only thing we know how to do is not going to work with this guy. We cannot just go, well, we'll threaten. Part of the key here is they love to threaten lawsuits and not follow through, right? Because they don't actually want discovery, which again brings me back to context. We have a president of the United States who loves to threaten to sue people and then ends the lawsuits as soon as it looks like, oh, they actually can fight back and I'll have to engage in discovery, right? This is a pattern. This is a larger context. And I think it's totally appropriate to bring up the way these levels of power are employing the same strategies. That's not TDS. That's being somebody who lives in the United States, and we've got a corporation behaving like the president, right? That's worth noting. So I wanted to give you all a little bit of context about my writing, and then some things that I came across today, which helped me kind of process before I came across the BAM PR statement. And I think you will see why dealing with context is something that I'm never going to dodge. I'm never going to avoid. And the folks who are in the comments going, don't make this political or don't make this about something larger, like, sorry, that's who I am. So this is going to sound like I'm shilling, but really it's context. So for context, this was my first novel that was published, The Sum of Our Gods. And this book was published back in 2013. And it does not have a Benjamin character in it, right? And in one of the parts, there is a character who's a professor at a university who is being confronted about a book he wrote and makes the point that there is no one character in his novel who is him. In fact, all of the characters are him, or they are people he has known, people who have come into his life and come to be understood through his experience, right? And so for folks who are saying, hey, I think it's really terrible that you've got this self-insert essentially in your story, yes, it is perhaps too much, perhaps egregious in the current novel I'm working on, but it's also inescapable. All the characters are me, right? Or they are people that I have known. I mean, in this particular novel, I've got a character who is loosely inspired by Reckless Ben, Reckless Ken, the Billy Goat familiar, right? I would not have had that character a year ago because I didn't know Reckless Ben. I had never had any contact with him, right? I've got a character named Sir Steezel, who's a paladin. That's CoffeeZilla, right? Or inspired by CoffeeZilla, inspired by a small portion of our interaction with CoffeeZilla, wherein he really made it clear to us that he was trying to go out of his way to not take sides. In a way that was a little frustrating at the time, I admit, because we were saying, look, if you would share this fact or that fact, I think it would be a more complete picture. And he was saying, yeah, but it might look like I've got a hand on a scale, right? I think that CoffeeZilla sometimes, is so interested in showing his audience that he's impartial that maybe there were things he could have shared, and he's got to make choices when he edits, right? But he made choices that now that more of the story's coming out, I wonder if he doesn't look back and go, I should have shared this or that, but would it have seemed like he was putting a hand on the scale, right? And so that inspired this character in my novel, who's this paladin who always wants to do what's right and also be impartial. And sometimes those are in tension in an interesting way for a character. What if the right thing to do is very clear, but it's also biased, right? And so the character wants to, do the right thing, but the right thing sometimes is actually transparent and clear and biased. And so how can I think that makes for an interesting tension between him and the other characters who are going, then we just do this. And he's like, yeah, but, right? I don't want to take sides. Not wanting to take sides can put you in conflict with people who have chosen a very clear side, right? And so that I think is interesting. So yeah, so that was this book. And this book, what inspired it was I was in my, late 20s, so this was quite some time ago, and I lost my religious faith. And if any of you have grew up in kind of a religious faith tradition of any kind, and then left that, we use the word loss for a reason, right? That is not a happy thing that happens in your life, because a religious tradition provides you with community, provides you, wonderful people in my church, provides you with this external sense of purpose, right? From literally the highest of on high, right? Thou shalt do this, right? And if you lose that, you then have to say, what am I going to do with my life? Who am I going to be without somebody else telling me from a pulpit what literally a deity wants me to do, right? And you have to then redefine that for yourself. And so losing that faith was really, really awful for me. It was not like, yay, happy times, I've been liberated from this tradition. In retrospect, with distance, I can see that a lot more clearly. But in that moment, it was really painful. And so I then wrote a book that is a comedy to try and process that in a way that is funny to the reader. And that helped me go, wait a second, a lot of this is pretty funny, right? A lot of what I've been taught to believe is kind of absurd, but I had to get there. So I have a very different experience of this book than the reader does. Like I've had people say, oh, this scene cracked me up. And I'm like, I was full on in tears writing that scene, right? But it's funny for you, right? Because I wanted it to be funny. It's just, it wasn't funny for me at the time. So understanding that, there's no way to read my writing and not see that there is a larger context. Again, this is not shilling. I just want to illustrate this. My next book, The Digital Storm, you'd think would be completely devoid of anything that relates to our world. It is a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest, but in the modern day. And that was just an experiment. Could I do that? That would be fun, right? Well, when you do kind of in the modern day, the way that I did it was an intranet. And those of you who know internet versus intranet, this was a closed off system, was how I played with the idea of being trapped on an island. And within this intranet, there is a computer program, Prosper, that managed this bank's internal systems, and it becomes sentient. You could see why, Prosper might be what a bank would call their internal system, right? And that character creates another artificial intelligence program to see if Prosper himself, he genders himself, if Prosper himself is truly sentient. The way he decides to test that is, can I create something that is independent of me and allow her to be her own person? And that was a choice to say, I want to kind of explore the way that the character of Miranda in Shakespeare's play has no real agency. And so how can I, confront that? And so Prosper creates Memoranda. And then there's a virus in the system, and that's Caliban. And so I was using The Tempest to kind of explore these things. Well, even in an attempt to tell this story as faithfully as I could to Shakespeare's The Tempest, but modernize it, you're seeing it becomes a story about AI and viruses and, online trolls who hack their way into the system and get trapped in this intranet island, and then the bankers who are trying to figure out if it's moral to delete characters, to delete this program, or if they have to set this program free into the wider internet. That's, those questions, you can't ask those kinds of questions without getting beyond the story, without getting beyond a BAM story to what does the BAM story say about the larger world, right? Next one, corporate high school. So this was my YA novel about what happens if we allow not just a corporation, or not just corporations, plural, but a single corporation to take over public education. And this came about when I was sitting in a union meeting, and somebody said, hey, have you guys heard that Walmart has started to get involved in putting together charter schools? And at the time, we all laughed about it. And we were like, making all these jokes about, worst outcomes lowest outcomes every day kind of a thing. But I went home and I was thinking about, what does it say if Walmart starts schools? And what would that look like if there were this kind of competition to be starting Walmart schools at the same time as a company like Walmart, and if you look at its history, is all about monopoly, right? Creating monopoly and creating the lowest price point possible and driving out local businesses. Well, if that were the way schools were operated, what would we end up with? And the nature of the story is, 100 years from now, 100 years from when I wrote the book, that corporation uses the schools to convince everybody that monopolies are fine, and then becomes the only corporation in the world. And so all the corporations have been eaten up by this one company, and everyone thinks it's okay to have one company ruling everything. And my characters are in that one of those corporate high schools, and they're introduced, or at least my protagonist is introduced to the fact that people are fighting back in some way. And that's that's a book that I started to write a sequel. Who knows, maybe I'll come back to that at some point. But the sequel was about the ways that once people have power, they can justify literally anything. And I was really concerned at the time, this was around the time of Abu Ghraib, and I was like, with the idea that, this corporation would say torture is fine. And I started writing a book about torture and the way that, one administration says torture's acceptable, and the next administration says, no, torture's wrong. Under the Obama administration, torture's wrong, but we're not going to hold anybody accountable for it because we don't want to look like we're, criminalizing the previous administration. And so they don't do anything about it. And the next administration says torture's great, right? Because nobody was held accountable. And so I started writing that sequel, and I was like, writing a YA book about torture? Like, this is brutal. And I was not in the headspace, right, to be going, oh, I'm going to write a book about a regime that's engaged in torture, right? So I was just like, I can't right now. So then in the process of writing Don't Read This Book, and I'll talk about that trilogy, I wrote a couple of books of poetry. This one was very explicitly about my own kind of process of going through a shocking divorce. Like, surprise, we're not married anymore. And getting to a place of like, okay, but I can see other people and I can be healthy. And this one, I think, is far broader, but again, a better illustration of the fact of context. A lot of this poetry was written during the lockdowns, and sitting out on a back porch and having very little stimulus outside of my own world, right? There's a bird in my backyard kind of poem. This is what my dog is doing today kind of poem. And then all this broader, this is what's going on in the world poems. And recognizing that the world's kind of messed up in a way that's very difficult to comprehend right now. It's off balance, hence this uneven universe. So that was a really good process for me. But again, I hope you are seeing this pattern. I do not write stuff that is attempting to deny that we exist in context. And then I wrote this trilogy. Don't Read This Book. You people you were warned, the second one, and you people are monsters, right? And this came about because I had an idea for a book, and it was simply too big for me. It was it was a great idea for a book. I just didn't feel like I had the talent or means to write it. And so instead, I wrote a book about a woman who writes that book. And the book is so good that if anybody reads it, it will kill them. And in this world, there are all kinds of monsters, vampires, golem, there's a golem character, werewolves, all that. And they meet for an annual convention in Las Vegas, and they decide to weaponize this book that this woman has written. And then she is rescued by a vampire, a werewolf, and a golem who are trying to keep her books out of the hands of humans because they realize, hey, if that kind of wipes out humanity, humanity is our food. So they're not good, right? It's like a vampire, not good. A werewolf, not, the good guys. They're rescuing their food supply. And so that whole trilogy is a lot of fun. By the time you get to the second one, we get adorable baby werewolves who are super deadly, and by the third one we have a reanimated skeleton character who many people have told me is their favorite character in the whole trilogy. Every time he is meeting people, he just wants everybody to be his friends, and he has one arm that keeps falling off, and he's really good at catching it when it falls off and then waving at people with the arm he's just caught. He's a lot of fun. But as I was writing that one, I wrote my first and maybe last, we'll see, a nonfic book, Dear America, where I explained why I felt like I had to leave the United States. Now, I've been very open about this. That was an experiment that was a miserable failure on my part, right? We are back in the United States. We couldn't make it work. And a lot of the reason was we were counting on selling our store and having the proceeds. And then BAM took it. And we went, but we feel like we have to leave. And if you read this, you'll figure out why I felt like we had to leave anyway. And without those funds, and we were thinking, well, we've got an attorney, that case will be processed while we're overseas. No, like that attorney was like, you can't afford me, and you need somebody in Utah. And while we were overseas, we were trying to find an attorney in Utah. But you can imagine, like you literally can't even go into the bar association, find a lawyer page from outside of the country. So we got to the point where we were, I was staying up till 2 a.m. and calling people, calling law firms one at a time. And you call them and they say, maybe we could do that. Let's look into whether or not we could do that for you. And then they go, we found we have a conflict. Well, what we've since learned from Last Relic is one of the things that BAM does is they hire a lot of folks, not necessarily as attorneys, but there's a way to make it very difficult for people to find an attorney. You hire the same notary that somebody else used. You hire the same expert that some other attorney used. And a lot of attorneys will say, sorry, I have a conflict of interest. And you can make it difficult to find somebody. Eventually, we did find an attorney, but that was really, really challenging, right? Somebody asks, now that you're back in the US, do you still feel like you have to leave? Ooh, that's such a good question. I feel genuinely torn about what engaging in the United States does for our responsibility. I am using the roads. I am paying the taxes. I am I'm going to my local store and I'm making purchases and they're contributing to the economy. I am complicit, right? I am part of this country, like, not just because I'm an American and I was born here and that's who I am in that way, but like existing here keeps this place going. We all do that, right? And so I don't judge people who are here. I am here too. But there does come a point where you say, is the only way for me to draw a firmer line than protesting and voting and, those kinds of things, to say I am withdrawing myself from this system so that I am not supporting, injustices. And I genuinely feel torn about that. If I had the means to leave, would I leave? I'm not. I am not. I'm genuinely not sure. But it is something that I am, really wrestling with right now. I wouldn't have the means. An international move, quite expensive. Like literally sold my house and all my life savings that was left after the theft of our store went into this move. And when I came back, I was houseless. Right, I had nothing, and so I couldn't do it now. But if I won the lottery tomorrow, would I leave again? I don't know, because otherwise, am I contributing? And I feel that really strongly. Like we are, no matter how much we, voice our disapproval and our opposition, we are contributing to a system that is doing absolutely horrific things. And so I feel torn about that. And there's a grass is always greener thing too. That's a danger, right? Oh, I'll just move to this other country. Well, you know, any place you go, you are contributing to whatever that place is involved in. So I feel that tension, but I want to share with you the things that I was going to talk about before the wonderful BAM PR statement, because these were helpful to me in going, okay, maybe don't take folks quite so seriously in the comments, right? But first, somebody asks, I have a question. I have not seen anyone consider, could those sets identified in the safe be duplicates that could indicate none of the safe sets being recorded by Brandon? If I'm understanding the question correctly, it's, is it possible that there were other sets of the same kind that were in the safes, and that's why they couldn't have been Brian Mansell's collection? And the thing we would need here is a statistical analysis, because the odds of those sets, some of which were incredibly rare, all being in the same place, contributed by other sources that weren't the ones that the Mansell family had contributed, are, somebody's going to, have to actually do that analysis. I think they're more unlikely than a DNA mismatch. Like, I think that is so freakishly vanishingly rare. One of the sets, there's like 8 of them for sale in the entire world, right? And so the idea that by pure coincidence, they had all the same sets as the Mansell collection, but all the Mansell collection ones were gone, and an identical replica of the Mansell collection came in, I think is, I don't want to say impossible. I think so statistically unlikely that I don't think it'll pass muster in any court. Those were the Mansell sets, right? Plus, you can't get away from the fact that the Mansell sets were in the store when we walked out the door, right? And so the idea that they then, got rid of them in some legal way, first of all, becomes immediately impossible. They took ownership of the collection. They said so. Like, we take on all that consignment liability, was Kai's direct quote, right? So they took on the liability. But then, as far as, could they have like replaced them with other sets that were the same ones? The short answer is no. There's no way to build up an identical collection that just happened to be in the same place at the same time as that collection. So I can totally see why, and this is going to have to be something that's going to have to be conveyed very clearly in court. Some judge, some jury who doesn't know Lego backwards and forwards is going to go, why not? I see Lego sets and I see Lego sets. Could these be others? And it'd be like saying, yeah, okay, but imagine that somebody had an entire run of Superman, including Superman #1, and then they went missing. And then in some other video, we see an entire collection of Superman, including Superman #1. Well, how many Superman #1s are there? I think there's like 1 for sale that is in this, pristine condition. Therefore, this is the same collection. And I think that's important for us to be able to communicate to a judge, a jury, people who don't know about Lego. The Mansell collection was so unusual that there's no way that this is just that Brandon Best and Josh Johnson just had replicas of it, had an exact copy of that same collection. individual sets, absolutely. And that's what makes this so difficult. I don't think those will ever individually be found because, they went out and sold it to a person, that person sold it to another person. That one set, there might be a few hundred of those out there in the world being sold around. And so finding those would be incredibly difficult. I think the more likely thing is that the corporation is just going to have to say to the Mansell family, here is the money that is the value of these sets. And the Mansells will have to decide, do we accept that money? Because 2 years from now, that would be worth even more, right? Somebody says, have you seen the BAM Maps 100th update? I have not. I'll have to look that up. Somebody tell me what it is. What is their 100th update? Because, yes, the folks who've been creating the BAM Map, if you are following this deeply, they are amazing. And they've been putting together just incredible pieces of information. So I will absolutely check that out, but I probably shouldn't read that while I'm live. I've seen some people do that on live, where somebody will go, hey, check this out, and they'll look it up in real time. But I did have a few things prepared that I wanted to share with all of you today. So one of them was a thread on either Threads or Blue Sky. I don't know if there's a separate name for threads that are on Blue Sky. But this person had created placemats that were knit placemats with like birds and strawberries, I believe, on them. And in the comments, the person, got plenty of, oh, nice placemats, whatever. And then the criticism they got was like, so over the top ridiculous. It was, you are ableist you are classist for being able to possess placemats. You are ableist for, I can't remember why it was ableist, what the rationale was there. You are ableist for like maybe because they were, had all these beautiful colors, and somebody who was colorblind wouldn't be able to, it was absurd. Like the criticism of, hey, I see that you have placemats, and I have to come in to tell you that I disagree with you and you are a bad person, was so egregious and ridiculous that it was actually helpful to me. And I know that sounds weird, but it was a really good reminder that you can't take everybody in the comments seriously, or can't take them all equally, right? Somebody is bringing their life experience and their concerns to it in such a way that it's kind of ridiculous, right? And so, yes, somebody says Ammon's razor. 685 contradictions BAM has made thus far. I love that, right? So that piece was very helpful to me. This thread that I came across was very helpful to me. And then, this is a little bit gross, but I want to share it with you. The guy who started PragerU, and if you don't know what PragerU is, you can look it up. The guy's name is Dennis Prager. And Dennis Prager did an interview. So this is a guy who creates, among other things, curriculum for young people that's like got this really conservative like bent on it. So it says, like, for example, slavery wasn't bad, and many of the people who were slaves were merely indentured for life, and they liked it. Right, and then that, it's presented to kids in cartoony ways. So it's like, oh, that's fine. Let's indoctrinate the children. So that's this guy's whole shtick, right? Well, he did this interview where he decided to go out on a limb and make a hot take. And again, I hope this doesn't, like I feel like I should say trigger warning, because it's really gross. But he basically made an argument that AI child pornography is fine, right? Because according to his way of thinking, since it does less harm than child pornography, it does no harm. And he was like, therefore it's not evil. And the reporter, to his credit, was like, no, that's evil. That is wrong. That is gross, And this guy doubled down. And this is what I keep coming back to. This idea of not being able to go, you know what? You're right. I'm wrong. That is gross, right? And instead he had to go, no, it's fine. And here's why it's fine. And that had me thinking about this inability for some people to say, oh, I've done something that's really terrible, right? And so this guy had just argued about from his perspective, the virtue of AI pornography. And um, yeah, there are, somebody points out this is that is currently the legal posture on AI CSAM. I don't know what CSAM is, but yeah, this idea that it doesn't hurt anyone. Like, no, that's really awful. And it is really hurtful to the person who is producing it. It is hurtful to the AI, not that the AI, we have to worry about hurting the AI, but in the sense that it is training the AI that this is okay, right? It is incredibly hurtful to the person who is viewing it, who is then going, oh, I can fill my life with this stuff. How is that going to affect them outside of this, right? It views it in this isolation that says, oh, the harm is diminished in this one room, and therefore it's okay. Like, no, this exists in a larger context. And that context is what makes behavior like that so revolting. Is, yeah, you didn't hurt a kid, but you've reinforced the idea that hurting kids in this way is acceptable to you through this process, right? So watching Dennis Prager do this not only reinforced this idea that I need to remind myself of, which is that, that context does matter, but it also reminded me that part of the kind of internet discourse right now is, what is the hottest take you can take, right? And if the hottest take diminishes to the point where it's the guy from PragerU saying, AI child porn is fine, we have gotten to a place where the hot take alone not only should be dismissed, but needs to be like reckoned with, right? Like, this is not acceptable, and we need to figure out a way to say so, and address that, because yeah, it's gross. Somebody says, oh, child-based, yes, a CSAM is child-based horrific stuff. Yeah, yeah, I just, oh, it's so gross to me. And so, like, I just think, I mean, protecting kids was, as a teacher, is the single most important part of my job. And folks don't often think of it that way. But, like, my job is to help kids learn, right? But if a child doesn't feel safe, not just a child, an adult, anybody, if a person feels threatened, literally parts of their brain shut down because other parts take priority, rightly, right? Somebody is going, I feel like I'm in danger, therefore I'm in fight, flight, or freeze. And often, you may have experienced this as a kid, where you're going, I just can't with this today. And you put your head down, right? And the response of the adults historically has been, you're lazy, right? Or, well, maybe that kid is not lazy. What I used to say when I had student teachers is, as soon as you find yourself thinking that a kid is lazy, there is someone in the room who's not doing the hard work. And it's not the kid, it's you, because you're not doing the hard work of trying to figure out what's really going on, right? So somebody's lazy, but it's not the kid, right? Because that kid may be hungry. That kid may be afraid of stepdad. That kid may be afraid of the kid sitting two spaces over. And those would all explain the behavior in the same way. And there might be things you could do to address those. And if you don't think about that, right, then you are you're not actually taking care of kids. So much of my job was figuring out how to make sure the kids in this room feel safe and feel like this is a space where they can learn. Because what's the point of talking to a kid about the proper use of a semicolon when they're saying, I haven't eaten in 2 days, right? That they're right to say that their hunger is more important than the proper use of a semicolon. And so figuring out how to create a place where, hey, there's a Uncrustable in my desk, and there's feminine hygiene products in a box for a young woman who needs them, so that you can take care of the other stuff and get to the learning, right? And so that is that when I hear about these people going, what is the hottest of hot takes I can take? I will defend harm against children. Like, yeah, you're going to get attention. And we need to figure out a way to say, you got attention, but this is beyond the pale, right? This is not going to be in any way, shape, or form acceptable. And I think this gets back to the BAM thing. And I don't want to exaggerate it, right? I think BAM's handbook, where they're saying, aim for the kids, some people have said, oh, that's abusive. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't know about, I think it's a sales tactic that's gross, right? And we should acknowledge that that is gross, right? But yeah, as Rose points out, our legal system is still not adapted to AI, and says, hey, the horrific stuff you want to do with AI is fine because we don't have any kind of framework to address that. Which is a perfect transition to the third thing that came across my my transom today that I wanted to tell you about, and that was Gabino Iglesias, who's a great writer. If you've not read any Gabino Iglesias, he's great. And he's got a really good newsletter. And he had a newsletter that was specifically addressing this notion that using AI is in any way, shape, or form acceptable in the arts. And he said he had 10 points that he wanted to make about this, and I will see if I can share those with you in an edited fashion. 10 ways in which being against AI in writing makes you a gatekeeper. So this is that thing that people have been saying is, don't be a gatekeeper. Let people use AI if they want to use AI. And he says, here are the 10 ways in which being against AI in writing makes you a gatekeeper. Number 1, it effing doesn't. Number 2, it effing doesn't. Number 3, it effing doesn't. And the list goes on to 10. And then he says, I had to learn English, move to the US, change the language I wrote in, and hustle for 15 years to get a decent contract and make a life as a writer. Now I'm out of contract and struggling with this novel, which means I'm doing the whole thing again. That's the way it goes. Everyone is welcome to try. Everyone is welcome to write. No one is welcome to steal. If you want to be a writer, do the thing. If you want to be called an author, write stuff and get it published. Boom, done. You want to steal and call yourself an artist? Nah, F them. You want to call BIPOC and LGBTQ plus authors gatekeepers after decades of fighting racism and homophobia in publishing? F you. You want to tell neurodivergent and disabled folks who put in the work that they are gatekeepers because they don't want AI? You want to tell people whose books were stolen that you are the same as them because your, quote, output is a few novels you didn't write per month? F that. Trying to keep slop out of what we love is not gatekeeping. Telling those who want to be called writers to at least write is not gatekeeping. Writing is for everyone. There's no gate. We just don't want sloppers here ruining everything, flooding the market with trash, using too much water, ignoring the negative effects of it on cognitive function, and constantly yelling that we're all going to be left behind, which they have time to do because they're not busy creating anything. Anyway, buy a dictionary, people. Oh, and I am keeping my M dashes. Your stupid AI learned that S from us. FAI, have a great day. So, I very much appreciated his newsletter today. Again, that's Gabino Iglesias. Check him out. He is very, very cool person. I mean, he's a great follow too. But that was a in context of the, PragerU guy, Dennis Prager. I think it kind of illustrates that we have gotten to a place where I personally have gotten to a place where I'm treating everything in feedback and in comments equally, and I shouldn't, right? And I need to touch grass. I need to say, this is one voice, and this might be, oh, there was another thing on the Reckless Ben Reddit forum. There's someone, not sure, who this person is, not calling them out individually, a person posted this rant about me specifically. Like, this guy is, shame on this guy for injecting his politics into all this. And that's not what I'm talking about. I posted, thank you for the feedback, because I've tried to teach students. That's all you say to feedback. Thanks, right? You don't engage, right? If you disagree, you don't try and argue somebody out of it. but the comments then below it were really wonderful and were really illustrative of the fact that, folks were saying, hey, in your kind of takedown, you did an obsessive amount of research about this Benjamin Gorman person who you hate, and that's weird, right? And I think we need to get to a place where we can say, hey, Dennis Prager of the world, like, yes, you got attention, but this thing you're trying to get attention for by justifying, AI child porn, you got attention, and the attention is this is unacceptable. This is not okay, right? So that I know people have a lot of feelings about AI that are not related to the feelings of authors about AI. If you are not an author or an artist, you may be saying, but it has this use or that use. And I will be the first to acknowledge, like, if AI can be used to examine photographs, x-rays, and detect a cancer long before any human being could ever detect that cancer, great. Like, I'm not the kind of person who's like, no AI ever could serve in any function that would be beneficial. But we need to be able to have a conversation about what's I've heard referred to as the reverse centaur. Have you guys heard about the reverse centaur? This is such a great metaphor. So imagine you were like, I want to, my life would be improved if I could be a centaur, if I could have my human form from the waist up, right? And I could have the bottom half that was a horse, and then I could run, And the reverse centaur is, you're not specific enough when you say, I wish to become a centaur, and you become a reverse centaur. And now you have the, waist down, you are a human being. And from the waist up, you have the neck and head of a horse, right? Your life has not been improved. And what we have going on with the AI, it can often be that reverse centaur. See previous chat I sent. Oh no, I missed one. That was from Mercurial. Let's see. I'm looking back. See, I get to run. I really need somebody to volunteer to be my person who manages the chat until I get to the point where I can afford to hire somebody who does that. Mercurial. I'm looking back here for it. Making law simple. I'm looking for it. I am looking for it. How far back was it? Mercurial Ire. I know you're talking about a different author, but it made me think of Gabriel Garcia Marquez when he wrote many good books. Is that the one you're talking about? Yes. If that's the one you're referring to, I love Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He wrote, Love in the Time of Cholera. Beautiful book. Weird book, really, really good. He also wrote a book called oh gosh, I'm gonna blank on the name. I'm terrible with remembering names, titles, that kind of thing. But Gabriel Garcia Marquez has a novella that is written backwards. Somebody can search it and find it. But it starts off with a murder, a Chronicle of a Death Foretold. That was the title, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, and it tells the story of a murder at the beginning in this small town, and then goes backwards and explains why it happened when everybody knew it would happen, but nobody stepped in and did anything about it for different personal reasons. And so, one person saw the two murderers walking by angrily with their knives, but they were distracted by this other thing. And one person heard that the protagonist was cheating on his girlfriend, but didn't tell anybody. And they've all got their reasons, and it all goes backwards, telling the story of why this murder was basically why the town permitted the murder. And it's a really cool, really interesting book. I used to teach it. I taught it and couldn't remember the name of it, but I taught it a couple of classes, and it's a really cool one. So yeah, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, highly recommend. I taught that book in a class. So I teach language arts, and language arts is what, when I was a kid, we all called English class, right? But it doesn't have to be in English to be language arts, right? And so it's literature, it's composition, it's reading skills. There are a whole lot of things. And so there's been this recognition that calling it English creates a false impression that we're teaching a foreign language, when really we're teaching all these different skills related to reading and writing. And I taught language arts in English, but I also taught it a couple of times in Spanish. And so I had to find the right texts that were ones that I could understand in Spanish. My Spanish is not as good as my English, and that I could convey to my students. And a lot of my students who had come to the United States like relatively recently, their educational background was really varied, right? So some of them had gone through school, up until the time that they had left wherever they had come from, and so they had, but some of them had gaps. Maybe their family was forced to leave, you know, Guatemala when they were, under threat, and then they'd lived in a refugee camp, and then a year had gone by, and then they'd escaped to the United States or whatever. And so they might not have gone to school for a year or two, or maybe their family were migrant laborers and they would do school for a while, and then their family would have to move, because they would go to do the strawberries, and then they would go to do the apples, and then they would go to do the grapes. And so a lot of my students had these gaps. So I had to find a book that was interesting and that was appropriate in terms of the academic value. Like, are they reading hard lit? Are they reading something that's going to be challenging to them? But it's also accessible. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez was really good for that, because the language wasn't particularly difficult in this book. The story is super wild and interesting and engaging, and the length of it was not overwhelming. The students could pick up this 120-page novella or whatever and go, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to manage this. Sometimes you hand somebody a book that's just too big, and right away they go, nope, that's too too much. You hand them something that's smaller but actually a lot more difficult to read. This book is a lot more dense and difficult than this one, which is just this one welcomes you in with a fun story about vampires and werewolves and a golem. And if that's all you want to get out of it, you've got that fun story, right? There's a lot more going on under the surface for people who are interested, but that's, that was a conscious choice to make a story that was accessible, and then dealing with, not to give too much away, or because you, the reader, get to decide what the book's about. I shouldn't tell you what the book's about, but I was very concerned with the concept of mortality, right? It's pretty heavy, right? What does our life mean if we're going to die? And so I chose to talk about that by talking about an author who's thinking about that, and a vampire who's not going to die, right? I thought that was really interesting. Like, put this person in interacting with her, again, minor spoiler, later girlfriend. I guess that's in the first book, so that's not a huge spoiler. But there's a romance between this human author and this vampire, and the human author is really concerned with the fact that what is the point of life if we're going to die? And the vampire becomes her significant other and is going, how do I interact with this mortal who's not going to live as long as I do, right? And that's a really interesting thing to kind of explore. So if you're my Chris, I know you all know Chris. I can just call her by name. Chris says that I should stop giving long explanations of the book and I should just yell at people, lesbian vampires. And she's right. Like, that's, I need to not go on and on about it. If you like lesbian vampires, you'll like that book. But it's also a book about death and trying to live with the fact that we are all going to die, which is heavier than some lesbian vampire books might lead you to believe. So I find it really deep. I find it gets easier to deal with and talk about the more you lose more and more. Ooh, yes. Yeah. Yep. Right. Our attitudes towards death change over the course of our lives as we lose people, as we get closer, right? And as we understand our purpose differently. But there is this period, especially for young men, right? Especially for young cishet white men, right? To go, I'm invincible, right? In our 20s, right? If there are any cishet white guys in the chat, we went through this period where we were like, I don't have to think about much of any kinds of consequences because I don't face any, right? And then looking back on that, we're like, whoa, I could have died. What was I doing? I could have died and it would have hurt a lot of people, right? And we didn't think about it in that way. Like, oh, I'm going to go rock climbing, or I'm going to ride this motorcycle or whatever. And then we look back and we're like, wow, other people would have been really hurt if I had fallen, and you know, we haven't faced consequences in the same. And that was why the main character, very intentionally, I made somebody who knew a lot of different kinds of marginalizations, right? She's a black woman, she's lesbian, she has a parent who is her dad is the editor of a newspaper, and as a consequence, kind of moved around because to get promoted in the journalism industry, you move to where the town with the new newspaper is, and ends up in Salem, Oregon, where there aren't a lot of, he is a black man living in Salem, Oregon, who's, the editor of the local paper, and so she grows up in this very interesting kind of marginalized situation, and so she's far more aware of consequences than cishet white guy. And that was one of the things that I kind of wanted to address in the book. I've said I don't ever want anybody to feel like I am writing about a female protagonist, a black protagonist, or whatever, because I am some expert on the black experience or a woman's experience of the world, whatever. That is not my place, right? But I absolutely will write about characters who are very different from me, not because I'm trying to convey to the reader, this is what it feels like to be black, or this is what it feels like to be female, or this is what it feels like to be queer. I am not the expert, but because I am an expert on privilege, right? Like, I can say, this is what it feels like to be a person who is unaware of what it feels like, and I can juxtapose that against this person's experience. So my characters of color don't, go on and on about this is what it feels like for me to be black. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't go out and get a sensitivity reader. This book, because of that, had to have multiple, because I had to make sure that there were people who were telling me, you're getting this right, and I couldn't just presume, oh, okay, well, I know what it feels like to be a lesbian in the world. Like, no, I don't. I've never had that experience. So, there's what you can know from the outside, from friends and that kind of thing, and then there's getting an expert to actually say, not just somebody who's experienced it. Sensitivity readers are more than just people from a particular demographic. They are people who make, they're trained and they are experts at saying, okay, but this is how you write about it. And that's different than this is just my own lived experience. But they, ideally have both. So I had some wonderful sensitivity readers who were able to help me, and looking back, there were not a ton of changes, but the few changes really matter, right? So having somebody who says, the funniest one was, having my sensitivity reader who was reading it from a lesbian perspective telling me that I was getting the sex scene wrong. Yeah, because, that's... I am not an expert on that, never having been a lesbian, having sex with another woman. So, having a sensitivity reader to say, you might want to change this a little bit, was really helpful. Okay, so I feel like I've rambled at you all quite a bit. But I think that I just want to come back to that idea and, have this to post as a reply when somebody says, please don't try and make this story about anything other than itself. The answer is in BAM's press release, right? What would this press release mean outside of context? Nothing, right? But in context, it's laughable, right? They're telling you, hey, the great thing about BAM is that we'll help you find that missing piece. That sure means something different to those of us who know the story, right? And so, give people the space to connect this to the broader world. And yes, they might want to connect it to parts of the broader world that you don't want to think about. And yes, they might want to connect it to parts of the broader world that you don't agree with, right? And that is okay. Like, they could say, this makes me think of this other thing. And you could go, I don't see that connection. And that's a legitimate debate, right? I think you're misreading that connection. That connection is not the one that I think this illustrates. That's fine too. Like, we can have that discussion. But just shutting it down and saying, let's only examine the BAM story in the context that I personally am comfortable with, I just think is a way to almost, consciously, volitionally misunderstand it, right? BAM would love for you to only see it in the context that they want to present to you. And I'm not going to give them that, right? This is a story that is about something bigger than BAM. And if they don't want to serve as an illustration of a whole lot of other things that are wrong with the world, they could do something about that. They could choose to behave differently. They could choose to not double down, for example. One of the things that I'm going to be writing about in this next chapter is this tendency to always double down, to say, oh, you've caught me in a lie, you've caught me in doing something wrong, I'm going to do something even worse, right? Well, that is not universal. That is a modern strategy that has become popular and acceptable in certain circles. And we need to be able to say, hey, that's not okay. It is better in our society, the society we get to create together. We have decided that when you're caught lying, you fess up to it. And when you are caught doing something wrong, you can say, I'm wrong. Sorry, I was wrong, and I'm going to change my behavior. And I don't think we have to create a society where, that is the, end of your interaction with society. I don't believe in a society without forgiveness or expelling people or anything, right? But we need to say apologizing is strength. Right? Yeah, somebody says, a corp that cares, what a dream. Well, and I think that I thank you for that, because I think that is a live debate, and there are models. So I've been thinking about this. This will be a little bit of a tease, but I've been thinking a lot about that. So in the United States, those of you who are watching from outside of the country, we have this model where you can have an LLC, and an LLC means limited liability corporation, and it's just a way of saying you can't sue me because it's owned by somebody else, right? So you can sue the corporation, and the corporation goes fully bankrupt, but it doesn't take the person who owns it to bankruptcy. And you use this for we have shareholders, right? You have different members, right? So an LLC is this way of insulating individuals. But if you go fully public, here's one of the problems with our system. You then have a responsibility to make money for those either shareholders, or with a LLC with lots of members, your highest responsibility legally is to make money for those members. Well, what that leads to is these corporations doing things they know are unethical, but they're saying, sorry, I don't have any choice. I have to do everything I can to maximize shareholder value, right? So we've actually written in an excuse and a legal obligation, because an individual shareholder could say, wait a second, you chose not to burn unlimited fossil fuels, even though those were cheaper under our current system than solar panels. Then you took money from me in some way. And so you can, somebody says, BAM is waylaid, parlayed, effed, far from home. They can't afford time on our nervous systems. Yeah, they if you're dealing with BAM, it is going to take a toll on you. But the point I'm trying to make is, it is going to take a toll on you, because dealing with any corporation is going to take a toll on you in a system where we say corporations can only be concerned about profit. Now we have an alternative. There's something called a B Corp, which is kind of cool. And this is a benefit corporation. And the deal there is, you say from the jump, hey, if you want to invest in this B Corp, this corporation acknowledges from the beginning that it believes in something beyond just profit. And it will do things that are not to maximize profit, but are for the public good, right? And it doesn't cost much to become a B Corp. Any corporation could afford it, right? And then they could say to a shareholder, the reason that we made this choice to switch to solar panels instead of just burning gas, for example, even though burning gas right now is cheaper because of a bunch of subsidies, is because we think it's valuable, right? Not just because we think it'll save money in the long run. So a B Corp is a mechanism. And then, yeah, somebody says a corporation soul, like the LDS Church. I don't know how that works. And a lot of churches are not for profits, but there's really wonky rules around how much they can make, right? They can pay, for example, they can pay ridiculously high salaries. And so they say, we're a not for profit, but oh, this year we made billions of dollars. We just put it all into executive compensation. See, we didn't make any profit, right? And if it's a church, they are tax exempt. And that is another thing we need to really reflect on and explore, because I can tell you, as the child of two pastors, a church is a business, right? A church runs like a business. They think every year about how the money coming in and the money going out, right? And so we might be able to have a lot better society if those churches had to think about, hey, we're going to also have to pay taxes. I strongly believe that if anybody from a church is going out there telling people how to vote, they should lose their tax exempt status in a heartbeat. They technically can right now, but they're almost never prosecuted because the prosecutors are like really hesitant, right? And we just need to be so much more strict about that. If a house of worship is telling people how to vote, they are not tax exempt anymore. But I'm getting off topic. So B Corps are one model that could get us away from something like the way BAM is behaving, right? Where they have to actively think about how are we benefiting society. But there's another cool model, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I've been thinking about doing this for Not a Pipe Publishing, which is a worker-owned co-op. And so in a worker-owned co-op, you say it's still structured like an LLC, but the only people who are those shareholders are the employees themselves. And there have been some really cool models of this. There's a whole town in Spain that was essentially a company town, only the company town was not some corporation that was saying, you all have to behave this way. The company was the citizenry, because it was a company owned business. And there's some really cool things you can do within that structure where you can say this thing is beneficial to society because it's beneficial to our workers, and the workers are the member owners. And imagine a structure like BAM's only owned by the franchisees. And we may get to a place where BAM has taken such a hit that the only way to pay all the damages is to essentially declare bankruptcy. And if in the context of that bankruptcy, the franchisees could then take over, that might be they might behave in a very different way. I think that, anybody looking at this from the outside can say they've not been behaving with the franchisees' best interest in mind. Early on, Ammon was on some podcast and was like literally teared up. He was like doing this thing where he was crying about how awful this has been for franchisees. And I was just like nearly screaming at home when I was like, franchisees? We were franchisees. Ammon McNeff cannot claim to have franchisees' best interests at heart. Look at The Last Relic. Look at the folks in Canby. Look at the folks in the store in the Bay Area. They were all franchisees. How did Ammon McNeff treat them? Like, he cannot pretend he cares about franchisees. Too frickin' late. Somebody says, yes, tax the churches. Yes, taxing the churches would go a long way. There's a lot of resources that are being located in places where that you could do a lot of good in a lot of communities by not, having all those resources lost and essentially, hold up in religious institutions. It also creates a perverse incentive to start a fake church as a tax shelter. And I would hope religious people themselves wouldn't want that, right? Religious people themselves should be saying, please tax the churches so nobody starts fake churches, just to avoid taxation. That I think that would be a great thing, to have more religious people saying, tax my church so that there's not a fake church, in a PO box down the street that's just a tax shell, because that's gross, and the money needs to go to my local schools and my local firefighters, right? Wouldn't that be, again, I have to, say over and over, I'm no longer, involved in any kind of church. I cannot speak for what I think Christians ought to do because I'm not one anymore. But based on my memory of what I was taught Christians believed in, I think taking care of the local schools and firefighters would be more of what Christians should value than, than dodging taxes. But again, not a Christian, so I can't speak to that. Yeah, somebody says make a church and tell the congregation to vote for church taxation. Yeah, and then lose their tax exempt status and have to do the very thing you've been telling your congregants to do. That is a clever end run. Um, so yeah, somebody points out separation of church and state is the key, but would never ever happen for you guys. It's been here since 1905. Yeah, I mean, arguably, it's never been easy. Like, really, because when you have people saying, we value the separation of church and state, but the church provides the values upon which we build the legal framework, until you can break that idea in people's heads and say, no, 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 the values themselves for the legal framework could be concurrent with what you experience in your house of worship, but they can be disparate because they do not matter in the context of this courtroom or this legislature or whatever. We have a very clear separation of church and state. That's essential, right? But you go all the way back to the founders, and they're going, they were not Christians, by the way. This is a myth. They were deists, a lot of them. The Jefferson Bible, he literally cut anything that he found supernatural out of it. Like, it was like with scissors. Like, it was not Christianity at that point. But they did pay lip service to this idea of like, but we get all our values and our morals from, and they would kind of broaden it. So they would say, you'll hear this phrase, they'll say like the Judeo-Christian tradition, which, let me tell you, I did attend a synagogue for a while. I'm part Jewish, but I've never been a believer, and the Jewish tradition is complex in that you can be ethnically and culturally Jewish and not be a believer, and you're still totally welcomed into the community, which is very cool. But I did kind of feel that tension. It wasn't particularly comfortable for me, despite the fact that the people were very welcoming. But one of the things that I learned is that this idea of the Judeo-Christian tradition is actually not something that, many Jewish people appreciate. Like, please don't subsume us into the tradition. These are very distinct religious traditions. But the kind of founders who, again, not Christians, these deists, would talk about that and say this is where we're rooting things. Well, if you root everything in a particular religious tradition, you end up with making a really tough time separating church and state. And we have a long way to go to get to that place. Somebody says, BAM map, donate if you can. Yes, I do need to bring attention to that. The folks who are creating that BAM map are doing, I almost said the Lord's work, which would have been funny considering what I was just talking about. But they're doing just heroic work there, putting all that stuff together, and the amount of time and energy they're putting into that. So yeah, if you can donate to the BAM map, very cool. That would be appreciated. Okay, so I should make sure I'm not missing any questions before I let you all go. Tax the churches, yes. Yeah, I appreciate the Mercurial's point that BAM is just. I don't know if it can be repaired, if it's redeemable. I think if it is, it would have to be a totally different, not just two new people in charge, because we're never going to trust, right? This is, folks, anybody who's been involved in or done any research into Legally Mine knows that there is a history of shielding and hiding, right? Because Legally Mine, and this is not my opinion, this is what they advertised. Hey, we've got this great company that will help you hide your assets from accountability. Well, if the two people who have the choice to say we're going to leave BAM and clean up its image, we know are people who were previously involved in a company that said we can help you shield yourself from accountability, are we really going to trust that they were just going to voluntarily disappear? I don't think so. I think you will need a massive corporate restructuring where we know who's really in charge, and it's not just one new investor who may be beholden to the McNeffs. But I could conceive of a restructuring where it makes the franchisees the actual owners, and that would be very cool. That could be a way to kind of change it around to something that I think would be healthy and where customers could be confident. Hey, I'm going in, and it's not just independently owned. Like, there are advantages of scale. I'm not sure those advantages of scale work for BAM, right? I can tell you that, we had to pay a certain amount of money every month for advertising, and we would look around and go, what is BAM doing to help us advertise? Nothing. Like, it was just, BAM would then advertise. What BAM used the advertising dollars for was advertising, hey, would you like to start a franchise? Well, how is that helping a franchisee? Right? How is your local franchise in Florida or Wisconsin or whatever benefiting from BAM spending the money trying to recruit new franchisees? And yet they have to pay. So yeah, I think there are benefits of scale, and those benefits of scale right now are not manifest, right? BAM would have to be, but if the franchisees were in charge, they would be able to say, hey, BAM, if there's going to be one central office, it's going to be doing things like providing insurance, right, to everyone. You can do that more cheaply than you can do that if you are, individual businesses, right? Or, finding wholesale discounts that benefit everybody across the board. There are a few of those with BAM, but do they make up for the way BAM treated franchisees and continues to treat franchisees? No. So I think that a wholesale restructuring would be really valuable. And speaking of which, I already teased this, but I am thinking about reaching out to people about making Not a Pipe Publishing an employee-owned, different kind of structure. And so this would all be artists who are working together to promote one another's work. And if you know a writer, if you are a writer, if you actually came to this page, if you came to my account because, from way back, because you were watching Writers Not Writing, or you like, novels, are interested in that art form, and you are saying, hey, the idea of essentially an artist-owned co-op would be interesting to me. Let's be in touch, because I want to make sure that before I finalize and kind of formulate that, I'm getting lots of input from authors themselves saying, this is what I would look for that would make it worth it for me to, own a portion of that company. This is what I would expect to get out of it. So I would love to hear folks who have, ideas about how an employee I'll get way more into this in the future, but one of the things that ends up happening to indie authors especially is they recognize, oh, if I'm going to go indie, if I'm going to put my book out into the world, I need to do all the work myself. And they can recognize that on kind of a conscious level. But then when it comes to doing it, they get overwhelmed, and then they do nothing. Rather than, okay, well, I can't do it all, but I'll do the social media and I'll put out a newsletter. Well, good, that's better than nothing, right? Or I can't do it all, but I'll go out to local bookstores and I'll try and make connections with the bookstore buyers, right? Anything you're doing is better than nothing, right? But I think folks get overwhelmed. And if it could be highly organized, so you could say, I, as an author, am good at going and talking to my, local bookstore owner, but I'm afraid of social media. Or I'm good at social media, but I'm afraid I don't know anything about, running paid ads, or, whatever. And then the authors could be organized so that they could focus on their area of strength, but not just for themselves, for the other authors in the company. I think it could be really cool. So if that sounds like something that you would like to learn more about and want to encourage me to kind of pursue further, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to email me at notapippublishing@gmail.com. And just let me know, yeah, the idea of an artist-owned co-op is something you would like to help me explore. And I would love your input on that. Okay, so I've kept you all for far too long. Thank you all for your patience, and go out into your, if there is one takeaway from this, it is that you putting things in context is healthy. It is good. And if you avoid context, you're choosing not to understand. Oh, there is one last thing that I do need to explain or share, and that is that this episode has a sponsor, which is very cool. Thanks to Duncan Wilson. Duncan Wilson is the author of, pull up my text here so I can share the right one with you. Because Duncan Wilson is the author of a lot of books, which is very cool. But he is the author of, the next one. Let's see. She's the author of the book, The Essence of Life. And this is, you can get this on Book to Look. I'll put the link in the show notes when this is made as its own video. But The Essence of Life, this is the little blurb about it. They were not human anymore. Not dead, but not human. Decades ago, an explosion in the small farming community of Tunston, Montana triggered a cataclysm that changed the residents forever. Although they were walking and talking like normal people, observers couldn't help but notice that something was wrong with them. Before the explosions, they were like any small town. After, it was like whatever made them people had been stripped away. The battery of physical tests from outsiders responding to the blast revealed nothing unusual about the townsfolk. However, anyone who talked to them could tell that something was wrong. Eventually, the researchers gave up trying to help the people of Tunston and left them to die out there on their own. Now an ambitious student has stumbled across one of the responders' journals and finds himself caught up in the mystery. What happened in Tunston that took away the townsfolk's lives as surely as if they died? Determined to get to the heart of the mystery, Candace Jane Hoyle is on a mission to find out what droves of scientists missed. Her research has turned up 3 leads and started a race against time to learn the facts before the only people who can answer her questions disappear entirely. Each surviving witness she talks to brings her closer to finding out the truth of what happened. But can she figure out the mystery before it consumes her? That sounds really, really good. So that is The Essence of Life by Duncan Wilson. And you can find that in the book to read link that I am putting in the comments now, and I will put in the show notes as well. Can I put stuff in the comments? How do I comment on my own stuff as it's going? I'm learning. You can find that in the book to read link that I am putting in the comments. There we go. I put it in there in the link. So check that out, and that'll be in the show notes as well when this becomes a video. So if you're interested in Duncan Wilson's The Essence of Life, please by all means go check that out. I'm learning. Now I've got to pause this so that I'm not hearing an echo of my own voice. That's creepy and weird. Okay, so been reading all the page behind Ben back front. Yeah, there's a lot that I am throwing at you. I recognize in terms of, here's, one of Duncan Wilson's books. I've been advertising for a handful of those. And then, here's Gravity. I've got to see Marcus. Oh yeah. And then I'm putting out a new chapter in my book every week. Like, it's a lot, but I hope you are finding stuff that you enjoy. That book of Duncan's, it sounds like something I'm now going to have to grab myself because I'm really interested in that one. But then the one that I read about on my show last week, I'm adding to my TBR pile too, because that sounded really good. So, check those works out when you are taking a brief break from interminable lives about the BAM fiasco. And I know I also teased that we will have potentially something big coming from our side of the case. No details about that yet because it hasn't quite dropped, but maybe Monday. I honestly don't know. I thought it would be out there sooner. So there is more to come. You will be seeing more of me. So make sure you subscribe so that you can get a little notification, and you'll know when the next big thing drops. But on that note, I will let you all go. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you back here soon.